Cargo ships are sitting still. Ports from Shanghai to California are jammed. Amazon is canceling shipments even while they're en route. And China? It's staying silent, just quietly pulling strings. What you're seeing isn't just a trade issue. It's a carefully planned disruption of America's supply chain. And where does it hurt most? At the checkout, in your next car loan, and across every U.S. industry. On April 3, 2025, China issued a low-profile order to state-backed airlines. Pause all new Boeing plane deliveries. Indefinitely. There was no press conference, no public blame, just silence, and a freeze that erased $28.4 billion from Boeing's value within 48 hours. Bloomberg reported the decision affected 84 planes scheduled for delivery in the second and third quarters, including major models like the 737 and the 787 Dreamliner, orders Boeing was counting on to recover from its post-COVID backlog. But this wasn't about plane quality. A leaked Chinese Ministry of Commerce document, obtained by the South China Morning Post, revealed the suspension was a strategic response to rising U.S. tariffs. Have you subscribed yet? You won't want to miss our next upload, thank you, and let's continue. Boeing, once a symbol of American export strength, is now facing its sharpest overseas decline in 20 years. This isn't just a trade move, said Scott Kennedy from CSIS. It's a targeted pressure tactic aimed at a major U.S. icon. Meanwhile, Airbus shares soared 11.2% in Frankfurt as Chinese carriers turned to the European alternative. Why hit Boeing first? Because in economic conflicts, symbols matter, and Boeing stands for American industrial power. China didn't shout the message, it whispered it. Keep raising tariffs, and we'll quietly hit your weak spots. But this wasn't only about aircraft. The bigger impact was at sea. On April 1st, the Trump administration imposed a 145% import tax on more than $300 billion worth of Chinese goods. The Wall Street Journal compared it to swinging a wrecking ball at U.S. trade policy. Just 3 days later, marine tracking data showed a 47% week-over-week drop in Chinese exports to the U.S. Shanghai International Port Group. Reported more than 71,000 containers stuck at port, some for over 10 days. Cargo began piling up in Ningbo and Shenzhen. On the West Coast, American ports cracked under pressure. The Port of Los Angeles saw berth congestion spike to levels not seen since the 2021 pandemic-era surge. 27 ships waited off the coast. Unloading delays hit 96 hours on average. The cost to ship a 40-foot container from China to Long Beach exploded from $1,950 to $6,820 in just 10 days, a 250% increase, according to the Freightos Baltic Index. This wasn't just a traffic jam, it was about choices. Chinese logistics companies began halting contract talks halfway through, blaming tariff uncertainty. You can't set shipping prices when the rules change mid-voyage, said Zhang Qing, a director at Sotrans Logistics. America wanted to pressure Beijing. Instead, it strangled its own trade routes. And when cargo stops moving, it's not just store shelves that are affected. By April 6th, China's top 5 freight firms, including ZTO and Costco Shipping, stopped most bookings headed for the U.S., citing legal risks linked to backdated tariffs. But the real problem lies in the numbers. Exporters had to make a brutal choice: ship goods under risky terms, or absorb losses they couldn't afford. In Dongguan, a city that makes nearly 8% of China's electronics exports, over 1,200 small factories were sitting idle by April 10th. The China Federation of Logistics and Purchasing reported on one supplier of power banks for Five Below and Target. They told Caixin Global, "Our items are packed, labeled, and waiting at the port, but the shipping company backed out. We don't even know if they'll leave this month." This standstill isn't just a theory. U.S. Customs data from the first half of April showed a 34% drop in shipments arriving from China compared to March. To shoppers, stores might look normal now, but the supply vacuum is already forming. And it's not just small goods disappearing, big names in retail are taking hits too. On April 7th, internal memos from Amazon's Global Logistics Division told U.S. sellers to hold off on all incoming goods from China, pending tariff updates and storage reviews. Just 36 hours later, Five Below confirmed it had canceled more than $67 million worth of incoming product orders, roughly 11% of its entire second quarter stock. According to its SEC filing, CEO Joel Anderson said during an April 9th earnings call, "We couldn't justify paying 3 times the landed cost on items already under margin pressure." This isn't just a numbers game. It's a sign of panic from companies that depend on cheap, high-volume turnover. Canceling goods in transit costs money, but trying to sell tariff-inflated products to price-conscious shoppers can cost something more valuable, customer trust, and it's all happening at the worst possible time. U.S. consumer sentiment dropped to 75.1 in April, the lowest since mid-2022, based on data from the University of Michigan Index. With back-to-school shipments stalled and summer stock sitting still, retailers are now betting on local options. But how long before those bets start turning into bankruptcies? What's more alarming is this shift isn't just hitting novelty items anymore, it's reaching the heart of U.S. manufacturing. On April 11th, Ford stopped assembly of its flagship F-150 Lightning at its Wayne, Michigan plant due to missing microcontrollers that come from Shenzhen. GM's battery module production in Spring Hill, Tennessee slowed by 60% after critical capacitors and inverter parts didn't show up. AutoCast Solutions reports that in just the second week of April, the U.S. lost production of nearly 41,000 vehicles, costing $1.6 billion in delayed revenue. At the same time, Stellantis issued a warning tariff-related supply chain issues could continue to affect their production well into June. The auto industry doesn't run on weeks, it runs on hours. When a single part doesn't arrive, up to 2,000 workers may be sent home. You can't run a modern assembly line without a $12 chip, said Kristen Zajac, a policy analyst at the Center for Automotive Research. Even today, the average U.S.-built car still depends on at least 24 components from China, despite diversification efforts. With delays growing every day, some American factories have started salvaging parts from other cars, something we haven't seen since the early COVID disruptions. But this isn't a health crisis. This is a geopolitical chess match. And if the White House can't bring stability to imports, this auto shortage won't just be temporary. It could become permanent. Between April 1st and 14th, the cost to ship a 40-foot container from China to the U.S. shot up from $2,000 to over $7,300. That surge, according to the Freightos Baltic Index, is now rippling through the entire auto pricing chain. Stellantis, which gets over 23% of its EV parts from China, increased dealer prices on its plug-in hybrid models by 6.8% to 8% in just 1 week, citing unrecoverable shipping volatility. The Ford Mustang Mach-E saw a $1,200 MSRP jump after renegotiating freight contracts mid-transit. Even the used car market is feeling the heat. Cox Automotive says wholesale prices jumped 4.1% in mid-April, the biggest weekly increase since the 2021 chip shortage. But this isn't random inflation. It's supply chain chaos turned into pricing pressure. Every delay, every cost hike, every missing part. It all traces back to rerouted shipping and tariff uncertainty. And here's the painful truth. U.S. car dealerships are now shrinking inventory by up to 30% just to dodge these soaring costs. A CNBC dealer survey from April 17th shows one thing clearly. If you thought sticker shock peaked during the pandemic, get ready. This is what happens when the supply chain breaks on purpose. But here's the deeper question. Can these price pressures even be undone? Or is this just the new price of doing business? In today's fractured trade environment, shifting operations from China to so-called friendlier trade zones might sound like a smart fix on paper, but the reality is far more chaotic. In Vietnam, port operations at Hiong and Cat Lai had already reached 94% capacity by April 12th, causing shipment delays of up to 6 days, according to Panga. India's logistics, while expanding, still depends heavily on road transport, over 60% of all domestic freight, doubling delivery times compared to China's more efficient rail-based network. Meanwhile, in Mexico, companies are hitting different obstacles, namely border congestion. Commercial trucks at Laredo saw average wait times rise from 4.2 hours to a staggering 12.5 hours in April, as per CBP reports. Take Tesla, for instance. They moved battery module production to Nuevo Leon in 2024, but now they're discreetly leasing backup warehouse space in Arizona due to mounting delays. Even Apple's shift to Tamil Nadu is showing cracks. New suppliers are delivering products with defect rates 14% higher than those from Shenzhen, according to internal quality audits obtained by The Information. So yes, production is relocating. But the transition is anything but smooth. When you factor in speed, precision, and cost, these new partners aren't stepping into China's role. They're revealing a whole new layer of vulnerabilities. And that leads to a more uncomfortable truth. Maybe this isn't replacement. Maybe it's fragmentation. On April 12th, Beijing curbed exports of dysprosium and terbium, Rare earth elements vital to EV motors and military targeting systems. The timing? Just 11 days after the U.S. announced a 145% tariff under Trump. Atomus Intelligence reports that the U.S. gets 78% of its rare earth supplies from China. The impact was immediate. Lockheed Martin warned lead times for missile guidance systems could rise from 14 to over 22 weeks. Ford delayed production on 2 EV models, the E-Transit and F-150 Lightning, citing sudden shortages of high-strength magnets. Defense One revealed Raytheon is now pressuring the Pentagon for expedited approvals to source from Australian and Canadian miners. But even under the rosiest projections, those sources won't come online before late 2026. China didn't impose a sweeping ban. They choked off just enough to remind Washington who holds the levers. And in a rare public confession, GM's EVP Doug Parks told Bloomberg on April 15th, "There's no substitute that's fast enough or cheap enough to make up for what we've lost." This wasn't a full embargo, it was a tactical strike, targeting industries too critical to falter but too sluggish to adapt. And this brings us back to a question no one dared ask a year ago. Is car production recovering or is it rerouting? Tesla is fast-tracking plans to assemble the Model 3 in Berlin by Q3, bypassing US-bound components altogether. Toyota is revamping its 2026 hybrid lineup with simplified drivetrains to cut chip usage by 30%, according to Nikkei Asia. Stellantis, they're plotting an all-Mexico manufacturing run for several US market models, at least until the global tariff landscape settles. But none of these moves come cheap. New production lines, shipping deals, and labor packs are adding an average of 4 to 6 months to vehicle launch timelines. For the consumer, this means longer wait times, fewer discounts, and more stripped-down options. J.D. Power's April report revealed average new car prices in the U.S. climbed to $47,770, a $2,600 jump in just 1 month. Yet for automakers, this may now be the only viable route forward. If China is no longer dependable and its replacements can't scale quickly enough, then the global auto industry isn't just moving, it's fracturing. But the bigger story here isn't about supply chains or factory floors, it's about the road you drive on. This isn't a supply chain hiccup, it's a deliberate dismantling of globalization's most efficient artery. And from Detroit to Shenzhen, everyone is rewriting the rules as they go. But if you think the US-China shipping freeze is the final act, think again. Because an even larger shift is unfolding, not at seaports or assembly lines, but in global finance. Foreign ownership of U.S. treasuries has just hit its lowest point since 2011. Beijing isn't only restricting goods, it's quietly shedding American debt. And if China makes a direct move against the U.S. dollar, that becomes the next pressure point. And we're about to step right into it. Stay tuned for more hot news from 3 Daily News. Catch you in the next one.